Long ago, in a distant land, there was a queen named Iphis, known for her wisdom, kindness, and strength. She had everything: a powerful kingdom, wealth, and the love of her people. But she longed for one thing: a child to carry on the royal bloodline. After years of waiting, her dream finally came true. When the moment arrived, she gave birth with the strength and grace expected of a queen. But when the baby was placed in her arms, Isis froze. The child's skin was pale, a stark contrast. To her own dark complexion, fear gripped her heart. She knew the truth of the child's appearance would lead to disaster. Her husband, King Yuju, took pride in their lineage and would never accept a son who didn't reflect their heritage. If C realized the king's reaction would be unforgiving. She didn't have much time to decide what to do. Desperate, she made a painful choice. She would leave the baby by the river and replace him with another child, a child who looked like the royal family, with trembling hands. If C placed the baby in a basket, wrapped him in a soft cloth, and set him in the water. As the river carried the child away, she whispered a silent apology, her heart heavy with grief. As the basket floated further down the river, Iphis stood in silence, her heart breaking. She watched as her child disappeared into the night, feeling a piece of her soul slip away with him. There was no turning back now. She had made her choice. The king would never know the truth, and the kingdom would never learn of the child she had abandoned. But what Iphis didn't know, what she could never have known, was that this child, Callow, was destined for something far greater than she could ever imagine. He would not be lost to the world. And though she tried to hide him away, the fates had already begun to weave their own tale. Callow's journey had only just begun, far from the kingdom of Icy, where the river winds its way through the lands and whispers secrets of forgotten times. The waters carried the small basket downstream. The moonlight danced upon the water's surface, casting silvery reflections as if the stars themselves were watching over the infant inside. The river flowed with a steady rhythm, as though it knew the importance of this moment. The basket drifted gently, like a leaf carried by the wind, till it came upon a place where the river widened and sank deep into the ocean, a realm where the waters were darker, deeper, and full of secrets. In the heart of the ocean, where the surface of the water met the mysterious abyss below, lived the queen of the mermaids, Miri, a being of grace and power. Her beauty was beyond measure. Her long flowing hair the color of the ocean's deepest blues, and her skin the shade of moonlit pearl. The mermaids were known to be the guardians of the ocean's hidden treasures, protectors of its many wonders. But they were also known for something else: a deep, ancient love for the earth and the world above the waves. One evening, as the tide brought with it the calm and quiet of the night, Queen Miri swam through the waters, feeling the peaceful pulse of the sea. Her senses were sharp, her connection to the ocean strong. It was then that she felt an unfamiliar presence in the water. The subtle movement of something small, something fragile. She followed the current, her heart quickening with curiosity. When she reached the spot, she saw the basket floating just beneath the surface, carried by the river's endless flow. She drew closer and, with a graceful motion, plucked it from the water, lifting it as easily as a child would lift a feather. At first, she thought it was an offering, a gift from the humans above. But when she looked inside, her eyes widened in surprise. There, wrapped in a soft cloth, lay a baby, a child, as pale as the moon, with eyes that glowed like the ocean's distant shores. The baby was still, almost as if he were sleeping, unaware of the peril that had brought him to the ocean's depths. Miri's heart filled with a sense of knowing, a deep understanding that this child was no ordinary human. He was something more, something destined for a purpose she could not yet comprehend. She knew that the world above and the world below had crossed paths in this child, and she could not, would not, let him slip away. The queen of the mermaids, wise and ancient, felt an immediate bond to this child. She would care for him, protect him, and raise him as her own. With a single, fluid movement, Miri swam toward the heart of the ocean, where the mermaid's realm lay hidden beneath the waves. She carried the child with ease, her powerful tail guiding them through the water, her thoughts racing. She wondered what the child's destiny would be. What had brought him here? And why was he so different from those who walked the land above? As she passed through the coral gardens and past the glowing reefs, she reached her underwater palace, a place of peace and beauty where the mermaids lived in harmony with the sea. The palace was a wondrous sight, built from coral and shimmering shells glowing with the soft light of bioluminescent creatures. Here, Miri would raise the child who would become part of her world. He would be taught the ways of the ocean, the songs of the waves, and the wisdom of the deep dot in the years that followed. Callow grew under Miri's care. His body, though different from that of the mermaids, adapted to the ocean's rhythms. His skin, which had once been an oddity in the eyes of the world, became a mark of his uniqueness, a symbol of his connection to both the land and the sea. His eyes, shining like the clear waters, reflected a wisdom far beyond his years. A wisdom that came not just from the teachings of the sea, but from something deeper, something divine. Miri taught Callow everything she knew. She taught him, too. Listen to the whispers of the waves, to understand the language of the fish, and to speak the ancient songs that carried through the water. Callow, ever curious, learned quickly. His mind was sharp, and his heart was kind. He loved his mother, the queen, with all the affection a son could feel. And in return, she loved him fiercely, as if he were her own flesh and blood. But there was a growing feeling in Callow's heart, feeling that something more awaited him. Although the world beneath the sea was beautiful and safe, Callow could not shake the sense that he was different from the others. He could not ignore the pull of the land, the distant world that seemed to call out to him. He had no memory of the kingdom he had been born into, but he felt the weight of something greater, a purpose that lay beyond the peaceful waters of his home. The ocean was his sanctuary, but the world above was calling him, whispering his name, though he could not yet understand why. Years passed. Achuklo grew stronger, wiser, and more confident. He had learned the ways of the ocean and had come to understand the language of the creatures that lived in the depths. But deep in his soul, he knew that his journey was far from over. He was meant for something greater than the world of the mermaids, something beyond the peaceful waters of his mother's realm. And so, as the ocean waves lapped gently against the shore, as the moonlight shimmered on the surface of the water, Callow stood at the edge of the deep, looking toward the distant land. His heart stirred with a longing he could not explain. He was ready. The time had come for him to discover the truth of his past, to uncover the mysteries of the world above, and to understand the destiny that awaited him. While Callow grew in the depths of the sea, far from the kingdom of his birth, a different story was unfolding above the waves. In the human realm, the kingdom that Ifseed and King Yuju ruled remained unaware of the child lost to the river. Life continued as it always had, with the royal family living in the grand palace, surrounded by splendor and luxury. The king was a man of great power, his skin as dark as the fertile earth, his spirit filled with ambition. He ruled with an iron fist, demanding respect and obedience from his subjects. And he had long desired an heir to inherit his throne. After many years of longing, Queen Iphis had finally given birth to a child. But as we know, this child was not Callow. The child she had kept, the one she presented to her husband, was a boy named Urins, dark-skinned and strong, with the same fiery spirit as his father. The people of the kingdom cheered and celebrated the birth of their future king, and King Yuju, proud and satisfied, believed his legacy was secure. Arens grew up in the royal court, surrounded by luxury and adoration. He was a child of privilege, treated as the future ruler of the kingdom. His days were filled with lessons on leadership, power, and how to rule with a firm hand. The king took great pride in Arens, teaching him the ways of war, the strategies of rule, and the importance of their family's bloodline. But while Erin's was a strong and confident young man, there was a shadow over him, a deep, unspoken unease that seemed to follow him wherever he went. Though he was loved by his father, he could feel that there was something missing, something he could not name. It was on one of these restless nights that the king, troubled by an unsettling feeling in his heart, called upon the kingdom's most trusted priest. This priest, a man of great knowledge, had served the royal family for many years, interpreting dreams, reading omens, and offering counsel on matters of the kingdom. King Yuju, growing more and more consumed by the thought of securing his throne, asked the priest to speak to the gods to divine the future of the royal bloodline. The priest, his face etched with the wisdom of many years, sat in the sacred chambers of the palace. With great reverence, he called upon the ancient powers that watched over the kingdom. His voice was soft, but his words carried the weight of centuries. "The gods have spoken, Your Majesty," he said, his eyes gleaming with a strange light. "A prophecy has come forth, a prophecy that speaks of a child who will bring prosperity to your kingdom. This child will have skin as white as the moon, and will be the key to the kingdom's future. The gods have blessed you with this child, but he is not here, not among you yet. He is still lost, hidden somewhere in the world." King Yuju listened closely, his mind racing with the priest's words. A child with pale skin who would bring prosperity to the kingdom. He could not comprehend it at first. His own son, Arens, was the one he had hoped for, the one who would inherit his throne. But this prophecy spoke of another, a child who had not yet revealed himself to the world. The thought unsettled him, but also ignited a fire in his heart. He believed the prophecy could be the key to securing his dynasty forever. If this child existed, he would find him no matter the cost. "I must find this child," the king declared, his voice filled with determination. "If the gods have sent him, then he must be found. This kingdom will not survive without him." The priest nodded, his face grave. "The child you seek is not of this world, Your Majesty. He comes from a place beyond your reach. You will need to look far and wide. The journey will be long, and the path may not be easy. But you must search, for the future of the kingdom depends on it." King Yuju left the chamber that night with a heavy heart, his thoughts consumed by the prophecy. He knew that finding this child was now his greatest task. Little did he know that the child he sought, the one who would bring prosperity to the kingdom, was already living far from his reach in the depths of the ocean, raised by the mermaids. Meanwhile, in the human kingdom, Arens continued to grow, unaware of the prophecy that loomed over him. He trained to be a king, confident in his role as the future ruler. His father's love for him was evident, but so was the tension in the air. Arens could sense that something was missing, but he could never have known that the very prophecy that was meant to secure his future would soon turn his world upside down. For Callow, the child of the prophecy, was not yet ready to reveal himself. His destiny, though entwined with the fate of the kingdom, was still far from clear. The stage was set, and the winds of fate were already beginning to blow, though no one yet understood the true power that lay in the hands of the child, who was neither fully human nor fully mermaid. The days in the kingdom of King Yuju passed with a heavy sense of anticipation. The people celebrated the growing strength of their future king Arens, while the king himself became increasingly obsessed with the child of the prophecy, the one with the pale skin, the one destined to bring prosperity to the kingdom. Queen E.C., ever the gracious and beautiful queen, kept a watchful eye over her family. Her heart weighed down by a secret she could never forget. It had been years since she had made the fateful decision by the river, when the child who should have been her own was abandoned to the wilds of the water. The guilt of that night never left her. And in the quiet moments when she found herself alone, could still hear the faint cries of the baby as the basket drifted away, lost to the current. But she had done what she believed was necessary to protect herself. to protect her reign. She had taken the dark-skinned child's Erenz into her arms and raised him as her own, believing that no one would ever know the truth. But deep down, she knew that the truth would come out one day. And when it did, the consequences would be far beyond anything she could imagine. If the king ever learned that the child he had raised was not the one who had been born to her, that Kalohe's true son was still alive, the kingdom would fall into chaos. The king would never forgive her, and the people would turn against her. Every time she looked into Arryn's eyes, she saw not the son she had raised, but the shadow of the child she had abandoned. His dark skin, his strong features, were a reminder of the decision she had made so many years ago. He was her son, in name and in the love she had for him, but the true heir to the throne. The one who had been lost in the river would forever remain a secret locked within her heart. The fear of discovery began to eat away at her. She could no longer sleep soundly at night, for the fear of the king's wrath haunted her dreams. It wasn't just the guilt of abandoning her son that tormented her. It was the realization that the prophecy was no longer a distant, forgotten legend. The child with pale skin was real, and he was somewhere out there, waiting to be found. And when he was found, everything would change. The priest had spoken of the child's arrival, and the king had grown more determined with each passing day. He searched high and low for the child, sending messengers to the far corners of the kingdom, consulting with wise men and mystics. Every whisper, every rumor that might lead to the discovery of the child was followed with relentless pursuit. The prophecy seemed to be everywhere now, a constant presence in the court, in the halls of the palace, and in the thoughts of everyone who served the royal family. Queen Ic knew that time was running out. The king's obsession with the prophecy was growing stronger, and it was only a matter of time before he learned the truth. She had tried to bury the memory of the abandoned child deep within her heart, but now the past was coming back to haunt her. There were whispers in the court, quiet, fearful whispers that spoke of the lost child. They spoke of his pale skin, his unique beauty, and the prophecy that foretold his return to the kingdom. If the king were to hear these whispers, he would know that his son, the true heir to the throne, was out there somewhere, and he would stop at nothing to find him. In the quiet corners of the palace, away from the eyes of the courtiers and servants, Queen Ifesi wrestled with the burden of her secret. She had been a queen for many years, but this secret was something no crown could protect her from. She had lost sleep over it, her heart heavy with dread. Would her husband ever find out? Would the prophecy destroy everything they had built? And what of Kallo? Would he come back to claim what was rightfully his? Or would he forever remain a distant shadow in the river's depths? In the quiet of her chambers, Queen Ic would sit by the window, staring out at the stars, the moon reflecting off the palace walls. Her thoughts would wander to the child she had abandoned. Kallo, she had never seen his face after that night, but she could never forget the pale skin, the strange eyes, the way his tiny hands grasped the cloth of the basket before it was carried away. She had never wanted to give him up, but fear had driven her to do the unthinkable. She had abandoned her own flesh and blood, and now she feared that fate would come to collect what she had left behind. The king's growing obsession with the prophecy was becoming impossible to ignore. He spoke of it constantly, his mind consumed by the idea of a child who would bring prosperity to the kingdom. He had convinced himself that the lost child would be the key to his rule, to the future of the kingdom. Queen Ifesi, unable to bear the weight of the secret any longer, began to question whether she should reveal the truth to the king. Should she confess her actions? Should she risk everything to protect her family? Or should she keep the secret buried forever, hoping that it would never be uncovered? As the king's search for the lost child intensified, Queen Ic found herself at a crossroads. The secret that had haunted her for so long was now a ticking clock, counting down to an uncertain future. She could no longer escape the truth. The time was coming, and soon she would have to decide whether to face the consequences of her actions, or continue living with the fear that the king's wrath would one day consume her. King Yuju's obsession with finding the child of the prophecy had reached a fever pitch. His days were consumed with planning, strategizing, and consulting anyone who might bring him closer to the one with pale skin. The child destined to bring prosperity to the kingdom. But despite all his efforts, the child remained elusive, hidden from his reach. And his frustration grew with each passing day. It was on one such day that the king decided to send a direct message to the mermaids. The mysterious beings of the tenstisterious beings of the tensties. See, who had long been known to keep secrets from the human world? His messengers were given strict instructions to deliver a message demanding that the mermaids reveal the location of the child, who had been foretold in the prophecy. The royal court was abuzz with anticipation as the king's emissaries set out carrying the message that would be sent to the queen of the mermaids, Miri. She was a powerful figure known for her wisdom and strength, and her realm beneath the waves was a mystery to the human world. Yet the king was determined to make his will known. He believed that the mermaids held the key to his kingdom's future, and he would not rest until they delivered the child to him. After days of waiting, the king's messengers returned, their faces pale, their steps heavy with the weight of what they had delivered. They spoke of a response, a message from Queen Miri herself. "I refuse to hand over the child you seek, King Yuju." The message read, its words clear and defiant. "You and your people have shown nothing but greed and disregard for the natural world. The child of prophecy is not yours to claim. He belongs to the sea, and it is with us that he will stay." When King Yuju read the words, his face turned ashen with rage. He could not believe what he was reading. The mermaids, those strange beings from the depths of the sea, were refusing to comply with his demand. How dare they? The arrogance of the mermaids only fueled his anger further. They were defying the will of the gods, and in doing so, they were defying him. He called for his royal council, his most trusted advisors, and he read the message aloud. "The mermaids refuse to give us the child," he declared, his voice a low growl of fury. "They dare defy my command. We must make them understand the gravity of their mistake." One of the advisors, a seasoned diplomat, spoke up cautiously. "Your Majesty, the mermaids are powerful. They command the sea itself, and to challenge them could have serious consequences. We must tread carefully, carefully." King Yuju spat, his eyes narrowing. "There is no time for caution. This child is my destiny. The prophecy speaks of him bringing prosperity to my kingdom. And the mermaids would dare keep him from me." "Perhaps we should reconsider our approach," another advisor suggested, his voice trembling. "There may be another way to convince the mermaids. We cannot simply wage war against them." The king's face twisted with disdain. "War? Why not? They dare defy me, and now they will learn that no one, no creature, no bind can stand in my way." As the room fell silent, the king's gaze swept over his council. His mind was set. He had no more patience for diplomacy or subtlety. He would take what he believed was rightfully his, even if it meant facing the wrath of the mermaids. "I will send another message," King Yuju declared, his voice cold and steely. "This time I will make it clear that we will not tolerate their refusal. If they will not give us the child willingly, we will take him by force." In the depths of the ocean, Queen Miri stood at the edge of her kingdom, gazing out over the endless expanse of water. She had felt the disturbance long before the king's message reached her. The tension in the human world had been building, and now it had arrived on her doorstep. She knew that King Yuju was not a man who would back down easily. His greed was legendary, and his desire for power would stop at nothing. But she also knew that Kala was not a mere pawn in some game of power. He was a being of great importance, a child who would one day bring balance between the human world and the world of the sea. She had raised him as her own, and she would not let him be taken by the king's tyranny when the message arrived. Bearing the king's ultimatum, Miri's response was swift and firm. "You tell King Yuju." Miri's voice echoed in the chambers of the sea, her tone unwavering, that Callow is not his to command. He is a child of both the sea and the land, and it is not for him to decide where he belongs. The message was delivered to the human kingdom, and when it reached the king's ears, his anger erupted once more. "War it is, then," King Yuju declared. "If the mermaids want to challenge me, they will learn what happens when you stand in the way of a king." As he began preparing his forces for battle, the tension between the human kingdom and the kingdom of the sea reached a breaking point. War was looming, and neither side was willing to back down. But as the armies of the land began to mobilize, Callow, the child at the heart of this conflict, felt a strange stirring within him. He had always known that his destiny was greater than the world he had grown up in, and now with the two worlds on the brink of war, he could feel the weight of his purpose pulling him toward a path he could not yet understand. The storm was coming. The world was about to change, and Callow knew that he would be the one to shape its future. The kingdom buzzed with an energy that could only mean one thing: war was on the horizon. The news of King Yuju's ultimatum to the mermaids had rippled through the human realm like a storm on the ocean. The people spoke in hushed tones of the king's fury, and the palace walls seemed to vibrate with the intensity of his will. The king, known for his decisiveness and unyielding nature, had made it clear that no one, not even the ancient and mysterious mermaids, would stand in the way of his destiny. As word spread of the impending war, preparations in the kingdom began in earnest. The royal army was called into action, its soldiers sharpening their spears and forging new weapons. The sound of hammers striking anvils echoed in the streets, and the air was thick with the scent of metal and sweat. Every able-bodied man was expected to enlist, and the once peaceful kingdom was transformed into a machine of war, ready to march into the unknown. But despite the flurry of activity, there was an unsettling stillness in the heart of the kingdom. The citizens, though loyal to their king, could feel the weight of the decision hanging over them. It was clear that the conflict would not be easily won. The mermaids were no ordinary enemy. They commanded the waters themselves, and their power was as ancient as the sea. The idea of taking them on in battle was both thrilling and terrifying, for the ocean was a force unlike any other, and to challenge it could spell doom for all at the same time. In the depths of the sea, Queen Miri faced a similar turmoil. Her kingdom, a vast and hidden world beneath the waves, was preparing for the inevitable clash with the humans. The mermaids had long kept to themselves, watching the human world from a distance. But now their way of life was being threatened. Miri, the queen, stood at the forefront of this growing conflict, her heart heavy with the knowledge that the fate of both her people and the humans rested on the decisions to be made in the coming days. Miri knew that the child Miri knew that the child was at the center of this turmoil. She had raised him as her own, teaching him the ways of the sea and the traditions of her people. Yet she had always sensed that there was more to his story. He was not just a child of the sea. He was something far greater, something destined to bring balance to both the world of the humans and the world of the mermaids. She had never told him everything. He had never known the full extent of his powers, nor the importance of the role he would one day play in uniting the two worlds. Callow had always felt that he was different. His pale skin, the mark of his uniqueness, had set him apart from the others, both among the humans and the mermaids. As he grew, he began to sense that his destiny was not tied to just one realm. There was a calling deep within him, a pull that led him to question his place in both worlds. In the quiet moments beneath the sea, Callow had often wondered about the world above. He had heard stories from the other mermaids, tales of the human kingdom and its rulers. He had heard of the king's search for him, the whispers of prophecy that had followed him since birth. But despite these stories, he had always felt at peace in the sea, surrounded by the comfort of the only family he had ever known. But now, the threat of war looming, Callow could no longer ignore the pull of his true purpose. His heart ached for both worlds, and he knew that the time had come for him to step forward and face the destiny that awaited him. He could not let the war unfold as it was meant to. He was the one who could bring the two worlds together. He was the one who could prevent the destruction that was sure to come if the king and the mermaids continued down their paths of conflict, as tensions between the two realms reached a boiling point. Callow found himself standing at a precipice. The storm of war was coming, and it was up to him to decide which side he would stand with, or if he would create a third path altogether. One that could bring peace to both the humans and the mermaids. The responsibility weighed heavily on his shoulders, but in his heart, he knew what he had to do. In the human kingdom, King Yuju was growing impatient. The days were passing, and still the mermaids refused to comply with his demands. He had sent messengers, he had made threats, but nothing had moved the queen of the mermaids. The king's anger had reached new heights, and the pressure to act grew stronger by the day. The war drums echoed through the palace, their deep beats resonating. In the hearts of the people, soldiers clad in armor marched in formation, their faces set in grim determination. The king had made up his mind: if the mermaids would not surrender the child, then they would face the full force of his army. But even as the war preparations moved forward, a strange sense of unease hung in the air. It was as though the land itself knew that this conflict was not meant to be. The winds shifted, the clouds darkened, and the river that flowed through the kingdom seemed to swell with an unnatural force. The earth trembled beneath the weight of the coming storm, and both the humans and the mermaids could feel it. As Callow stood at the water's edge, looking out over the vast expanse of the sea, he knew that time was running out. Decisions made in the coming days would shape the future of both worlds. The choice was his, and the pressure to act was greater than ever before. He had to find a way to stop the war. He had to find a way to unite the two worlds before it was too late. And so the conflict grew. The armies prepared, the waters stirred, and the fate of the kingdom and the fate of Callow hung in the balance. What would happen when the two forces collided? Would Callow be able to stop the war, or would the destruction of both realms be inevitable? Only time would tell. The world was on the brink. Every passing day brought with it more uncertainty, more tension, and more fear. The forces of the human kingdom were gathering at the borders of the sea, while the mermaids readied themselves beneath the waves. The earth itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable clash between these two powerful realms. War had become a certainty. But what neither side understood, what neither side could yet see, was that the real battle would not be fought with weapons or armies. It would be fought with something far more powerful. The heart of a child, Callow, stood at the water's edge looking out over the vast expanse of the ocean. His heart ached with the weight of the choice before him. He had always known, deep inside, that he was different. His pale skin, the mark of his unique heritage, set him apart from the mermaids, who were as dark as the depths of the sea. Yet he had never fully understood the significance of his difference. He had been raised by Miri, the queen of the mermaids, and had always thought of the sea as his true home. But as the days passed and the tension between the humans and the mermaids grew, something inside him began to stir. He knew his destiny was not to remain hidden in the depths of the sea. The time had come for him to step forward, to face the truth about who he was and what he was meant to do. He was not just a child of the sea or the land. Here was something more, something that neither side could fully understand dawn in the distance. Callow saw the first signs of the coming storm. The clouds had gathered, dark and foreboding, and the winds howled with a fury that seemed to match the anger of the human king. The waters of the sea churned restlessly, as though they, too, were preparing for the inevitable conflict. The mermaids, led by Queen Miri, had prepared themselves for the fight that would come. Though deep in her heart, Miri wished there was another way. Callow's mind raced as he walked closer to the water. He had been raised to believe that the mermaids were the true guardians of the ocean, that their way was the only way. But now, as he stood there, the weight of the prophecy began to settle over him. He was not just a child of the sea, he was a bridge between the worlds of the humans and the mermaids. The key to peace lay in him, but how could he make them understand? How could he stop the war before it consumed both worlds? His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind him. Miri, the queen who had raised him, stepped forward, her face solemn as she approached him. "You feel it, don't you?" she asked softly. Her voice, though calm, carried the weight of years of wisdom and sorrow. "The storm that is coming. It is not just the storm in the skies, Callow. It is the storm in your heart. You are the one who must decide, my son." Callow nodded, though his heart felt heavy. "I don't know what to do, Mother. I don't belong fully to either side. I love the sea, but I also know that the humans, they need me. They need the child of prophecy." Miri placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, her gaze distant. "You are not just the child of prophecy, Callow. You are the child of both worlds. You were sent to us for a reason, and that reason is to bring balance. But balance cannot be achieved through war. It must be achieved through understanding, through unity." The words echoed in Callow's mind as he stood there, staring out at the turbulent sea. He had always known that his life was meant for something greater, but now the burden of that knowledge felt overwhelming. He had to stop the war, had to bring the two worlds together before it was too late. But how? As if in answer, a great wave suddenly rose before him, crashing against the shore with a roar. Callow stepped back, startled. But the wave was not violent. It was as though it was calling to him, urging him to step forward. The water shimmered with a golden light, and in that moment Callow felt a surge of power unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was as if the very essence of the sea was speaking to him, telling him that he had the power to change the course of history. Without thinking, Callow stepped into the water. The golden light surrounded him, and he felt his body change. His pale skin began to glow with an ethereal light, and his hair seemed to ripple like the ocean's waves. The power that had been dormant inside him for so long now flowed freely, and for the first time he felt fully alive as he stood there. The water swirling around him, he felt a deep connection to both the land and the sea. He could feel the pulse of the earth beneath him, the rhythm of the waves, and the heartbeat of every living thing. He was the bridge. He was the one who could unite the two worlds. The golden light around him grew brighter, and suddenly his voice rang out, loud and clear, carrying across the water, across the land, and even to the ears of King Yuju himself. "Enough." Callow's voice thundered, though there was no anger in it. It was a command, calm and unwavering, and the world seemed to hush in response. "This war will not happen. I am the child of prophecy, and I have come to unite the worlds of the humans and the mermaids. No more bloodshed. No more hatred. You will listen, or you will destroy yourselves." The earth trembled beneath Callow's words, and a wave of energy rippled through the waters. The mermaids, hearing his voice, stopped in their tracks. Queen Miri watched in awe as the child she had raised, the child she had always known would be special, revealed his true power, and on the land. King Yuju, sitting upon his throne, felt a strange chill crawl up his spine. The sound of Callow's voice seemed to echo in his mind, and for the first time he questioned his decisions. For the first time he wondered if there was another way. But even as the revelation began to take root, both sides stood at the precipice, ready to either heed Callow's words or continue their path toward destruction. The choice was now in their hands, and Callow knew that whatever happened next, his destiny had been set in motion. The earth had barely settled from Callow's powerful declaration. His words still hung heavy in the air, reverberating across both realms, stirring the waters and reaching the hearts of all who heard them. But As the silence stretched on, there was no immediate resolution. No one moved out the mermaids in the depths of the ocean, nor the humans who stood on the brink of war. The storm that Callow had sought to prevent had not yet passed. Instead, it lingered, as if waiting for a final decisive moment. King Yuju, seated on his massive throne, was lost in thought. The words of the child, powerful and divine, had struck him in a way he hadn't expected. The arrogance that had once defined him now seemed like a distant memory, replaced by something deeper, something that felt like doubt, something that felt like regret. He had ruled with a heavy hand, seeking control over everything around him, believing that power alone could secure his legacy. But now, after hearing Callow's voice, the king wondered if there had been another way all along. The royal court, once filled with the noise of endless planning for battle, had fallen eerily silent. The nobles, soldiers, and advisors who surrounded the king stood still, unsure of what to do. The future of the kingdom of all the kingdoms hung in the balance. They had been ready for war, but now they were uncertain. The message from the child had unsettled them all. King Yuju clenched his fists on the arms of his throne. His pride, the pride that had always driven him, now felt like an anchor, holding him in place. He knew he should have acted long before this moment, but the weight of his decisions now crushed him. The voice of the child, Callow, had not only commanded the waters, but had also reached into the deepest parts of his own heart. "I cannot," the king whispered, though it was as much to himself as it was to anyone else. "I cannot be the one to destroy everything. Not for my ego, not for the kingdom's pride." The court remained silent, waiting for their king to decide. But before any further words could be exchanged, something changed in the air, something that sent a wave of fear through the palace. Callow had come. The waters at the foot of the palace glimmered as the young boy, now more powerful than any mere mortal, stepped forth, his presence commanding yet peaceful. His once pale skin now glowed with an ethereal golden light, as though the sun itself had chosen to shine through him. The very essence of the ocean seemed to surround him, and it was as if he brought the peace of the deep with him. His appearance was both mesmerizing and unsettling, for he was no longer just a child, but a divine force made flesh. Miri, standing by his side, looked on with a mixture of pride and concern. She had never seen Callow so transformed, so resolute. This was the moment she had feared, yet knew would come. He had to face the king, not as a boy, but as a god, as the chosen one. The bridge between worlds. King Yuju stood from his throne, his body trembling. He had seen many things in his life, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. The child, the one he had spent years searching for, stood before him, not as a threat, but as something far greater. A realization dawned on the king, one that struck him to his core. This was not a war for power. This was a war for peace. And in this moment, he knew he had been blinded by his own hunger for control. Callow's voice broke the silence, soft but filled with an undeniable authority. "King Yuju, it is time for you to see beyond your pride. It is time for you to understand what true power is." His words were not accusations, but a gentle call for understanding, an invitation to change. The king, though filled with guilt, could not look away. He felt as though he were standing before something far more powerful than himself. The golden light that surrounded Callow seemed to pulse in rhythm with the king's heartbeat. Then, in an unexpected gesture, Callow extended his hand towards King Yuju. The air itself seemed to shimmer with magic. And the king felt a strange warmth, a lightness in his chest that had not been there in years. "You have ruled through fear, but I will show you the power of humility," Callow continued. "And through humility you will find peace." The king's prideful heart wavered. He had spent so many years thinking that strength meant domination, that greatness was measured in the wealth of armies and riches. But here, before him, stood a child who embodied strength in a way he could never have imagined. without fully understanding what he was doing. King Yuju stepped forward and, in a rare act of vulnerability, knelt before Callow. His knees hit the ground with a soft thud, and the room fell completely still. For the first time in his life, King Yuju acknowledged the enormity of his errors. He had fought against his own people, against the mermaids, against what was right, all for the sake of his own pride. And now, before this divine child, he realized the price of his actions. With trembling hands, the king reached out, accepting Callow's offered hand. The moment their palms met, something extraordinary happened. A warm light flooded through the king's body, filling him with a deep sense of clarity and peace that he had never known. It was as if the very core of his being was being healed, and with each breath, the burden of his arrogance and cruelty melted away. Callow's gaze softened as he spoke, his voice a gentle whisper. "You are not beyond redemption, King Yuju, but you must make the choice. You must choose to lead with love, with kindness, with humility. Only then will your kingdom truly prosper." The king closed his eyes as the weight of those words sank in. He had lived for so long thinking that power could be bought and forced, but now he knew. True power came from healing, from forgiveness, from understanding. He raised his head, looking at Callow with eyes full of remorse. "I was wrong, child. I have been wrong all along. And I will do everything in my power to make amends, to bring peace, not war." The change in the king was unmistakable. The once arrogant ruler, now humbled by the divine presence of Callow, made a promise to himself, to his people, and to the mermaids. There would be no war. There would be only peace. The room, once filled with the tense anticipation of battle, now stood in solemn silence, the heavy atmosphere replaced with a quiet hope. And in that moment, the tides of fate began to shift. Callow, knowing his work was not yet finished, turned towards the sea, feeling the cool embrace of the waves against his feet. His purpose was becoming clearer with every passing moment, and though the road ahead would not be easy, he now knew with certainty that he was ready. For peace had been sown, and the seeds of unity had taken root. The world held its breath. The tension that had hung thick in the air for so long now seemed to dissipate like mist under the warmth of the sun. What had once felt like an unstoppable storm of conflict was now calmed by a single moment of clarity. The day had come when both realms, human and mermaid, would learn to listen, to understand, and to accept. The river where the two worlds met shimmered in the early morning light, its waters usually a battleground for bitter disputes, and accusations now reflected the peaceful harmony that had been achieved. On the riverbank, the gathering of people, humans, mermaids, and creatures of the land alike waited in silence. They were unsure of what to expect, but they felt the change. A promise had been made, and today it would be fulfilled. Callow stood at the water's edge, his figure bathed in the glow of the rising sun. He was no longer the boy abandoned by his mother, nor the child raised beneath the waves. He was something far greater. The golden light that had surrounded him before now radiated from within, a reflection of the power he carried, the power to heal, to unite, to restore. His presence alone seemed to command peace, and the winds, the waters, even the very earth seemed to bow in acknowledgement. Beside him stood Queen Mary, her heart full of pride and hope. She had raised Callow, and though she had known for some time that he was destined for greatness, she had never imagined the full scope of his purpose. Now, watching him stand at the threshold between the worlds, she knew the time had come to let go. Her son, her child, was not just of the mermaids, but of the world itself. And the world would listen to him, for he had found his place between both realms. From the human side of the riverbank, King Yuju approached, his steps slow and deliberate. His posture had changed since the last time Callow had seen him. The king had humbled himself, and with each step he seemed to carry the weight of a newfound wisdom. His face, once hard and filled with arrogance, was now softened, his eyes full of remorse and understanding. The kingdom, his kingdom, was no longer his to rule with an iron fist, it was his to guide with love, with humility, and with a heart open to the possibilities of unity. As he reached Callow, the king bowed his head not out of submission, but out of respect. "I have come to make things right," he said, his voice steady, though the emotions behind it were clear. "I know I cannot undo the harm I have caused, but I will work with you to bring peace to our people, to unite the realms." Hello, smiled a smile that was both warm and knowing. He had known that the king would come to this place just as he had known that peace was possible. "It is not too late," King Udu Callow said softly. "The path to peace is not found in perfection, but in the willingness to change. We have all made mistakes, but we have the power to correct them, together." On the other side of the river, the mermaids had gathered, their bodies flowing gracefully in the water. Their eyes filled with curiosity, hope, and a sense of cautious optimism. They, too, had felt the change. They had heard Callow's words, felt his power, and now they stood, ready to witness the unification of the two worlds. Miri, leading the mermaids, stepped forward, her gaze locked with that of King Uju. "I am ready," Miri said, her voice echoing in the silence. "We are ready to join with you, King Uju. Let us move beyond fear. Let us move beyond the past." Callow turned to face the river, his arms raised to the sky. He could feel the magic in the air, the connection between the two worlds, so fragile yet so strong. He closed his eyes, drawing upon the power that flowed through him, the power of both, the sea and the land. He could sense the hearts of all those who had gathered, the humans, the mermaids, the animals, the trees, each one connected in a web of life that spanned both realms. He spoke then, his voice low yet carrying across the land and the water, like the sound of 1,000 voices coming together in harmony. "We are all connected. Whether we are of the land, the sea, or the sky, we share this world. It is time for us to live in harmony, to understand one another, to protect this world. Together, no more war, no more fear, only peace." As his words echoed through the air, a brilliant light burst forth from the center of the river. It was not blinding, but illuminating like a beacon of hope. The light spread outwards, touching every corner of the land, every creature, every person, and every mermaid. It was the light of unity, of love, of forgiveness, and of understanding. For a moment the world seemed to hold its breath once more. And then, as the light faded, the first true sign of peace emerged. On the banks of the river, the humans and the mermaids came together, not as enemies, but as equals. King Uju extended his hand to Miri, and though they had once been at odds, now they stood side by side. The mermaids, with their deep connection to the ocean, and the humans, with their connection to the earth, were united in a way that neither side had thought possible. The animals, the trees, the rivers seemed to breathe in unison. The winds blew softly, carrying the scent of new beginnings. The harmony that Callow had promised was not just a dream, 'twas reality. The ceremony was simple, yet sacred. Both sides gathered together by the water, exchanging gifts, words of goodwill, and vows of peace. The air was filled with music and song, a celebration of the unity that had been achieved. It was a day of joy, a day of healing, a day of rebirth as the sun began to set. Casting its golden glow across the river, Callow stood apart from the gathering. He watched as the people celebrated, as they embraced one another, as they danced and laughed together. He knew his work was done. The world had been changed, and the two realms once divided by fear, hate, and misunderstanding were now united with a final, peaceful smile. Callow turned toward the sea. He had fulfilled his purpose, and now it was time for him to return to where he belonged. But he would never truly leave. His legacy would live on in the hearts of all who had witnessed this day, in the harmony between the sea and the land, in the love that now bound them all together. As Callow walked towards the water, he felt the cool embrace of the waves. The ocean called to him as it always had. And with a final glance at the world he had helped heal, he disappeared into the depths, his golden light fading into the horizon. But the peace he had brought remained. For it was not just the end of a journey, it was the beginning of a new era.